At 10°C, the world falls silent. Only snow and wind stretch endlessly across the frozen land. Somewhere in that white emptiness, 3 tiny shapes stumble together, trembling, freezing, barely able to stand. They were taken by the heartless, 3 innocent lives abandoned, discarded as if they never mattered. Then a light appears, a Navy SEAL and his dog, crossing paths with a destiny that binds them forever. He gathers them into his arms, warming their fragile bodies, a rescue that will quietly change his own life. Because these 3 small lives will soon awaken a woman and expose a crime meant to stay buried forever. Where are you watching from? Like, comment, and subscribe, because every life deserves a second chance. Winter came to northern Minnesota with a clarity that felt almost moral, the kind of cold that stripped the world down to its honest edges. Dawn laid a pale blade across the frozen lake below the ridge, light so clean it seemed to erase yesterday's footprints. On the slope above that lake stood a single cabin, squared logs darkened by decades of weather, smoke lifting from the stone chimney in a thin, patient line. Inside lived Noah Kerr, 40 years old, a retired Navy SEAL who had learned in one life how to move through chaos, and in this one how to sit still inside it. He was tall, just under 6'1", with the broad shoulders of a man who had carried weight for others and the quieter build of someone who now trained only to keep his body honest. His hair was a neat, dark brown undercut, always clean. His face was clean-shaven, angular, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked made for silence. His eyes, a steady blue-gray, carried the habit of watching before speaking, as if the world were a room he preferred to read rather than enter. He wore the same practical uniform every day, long-sleeve camouflage top and matching trousers cut close at the knee, a dark tactical belt with a small pouch and a holster-like sheath for tools, tan combat boots meant for ice and rock, and on his left wrist a heavy steel watch with a black face, an indulgence he never talked about. The only warmth in the room beyond the fire was the presence of his dog. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, male, built like a working animal, large and muscular, chest wide, coat black and tan with the black heavy along his back, ears upright, amber eyes deep and watchful. There was a slight hitch in the dog's left front step, a reminder of an old fracture, and in the corner by the door hung a scorched piece of K9 harness, kept like a relic. The dog's temperament matched the man's, calm, vigilant, unsentimental in motion, yet unshakably loyal. They had learned each other in a language of glances and breath. That morning, the thermometer nailed to the porch read -10°C, the wind sharp enough to make the windows whisper. Noah moved through the cabin with practiced economy, stoking the fire, checking the kettle, listening to the small sounds that told him the building was holding against the cold. He had chosen this place for the way it forced him to be present. Silence here was not emptiness. It was a field where thoughts could either wander or finally lie down. He had learned after leaving the teams that stillness could be as difficult as any mission. The dog followed him at a measured distance, nails soft on wood, head occasionally tilting to read a sound Noah had not yet noticed. When the kettle sang, Noah poured, took his mug to the window, and let his gaze rest on the lake's hard white surface. It was then that the dog stopped. Not froze, not bristled, simply stopped, the way a compass needle stills when it finds north. His ears angled toward the door. Noah felt it before he saw it, a tightening behind the eyes, the familiar sense that something had entered the edge of the day. He set the mug down and crossed to the porch. The door opened on a breath of winter so sharp it felt like a reprimand. Snow lay in clean drifts along the boards, the world hushed to a bright, dangerous quiet. At the foot of the steps were 3 small shapes, huddled as if trying to become one animal. German Shepherd puppies, no more than 2 months old, coated in snow like ash, ribs barely padded, their paws half buried. One trembled in small, desperate pulses. One favored a foreleg. The fur along it darkened where the skin had been scraped. The smallest made a thin, rasping sound that could only be called a cough if the word could be whispered. Before Noah could step down, the dog placed himself squarely in front of him, not in warning, but in insistence, as if to say, "Do not rush. Do not make this only about kindness. Look." It was an odd, almost ceremonial gesture, and it gave Noah a moment to notice what his heart had already decided. Out here in this cold, nothing ended up on a porch by accident. He crouched, speaking softly, letting the sound of his voice be a bridge rather than a command. The puppies did not run. The larger of the three lifted his head, eyes too large for his face, and held Noah's gaze with a trust that hurt. Noah slid his hands beneath their small bodies, surprised by how light they were, and carried them inside. The dog followed, positioning himself beside the hearth like a sentry, amber eyes tracking each movement. Noah worked quickly, efficiently, the way he always did when the world demanded it. Towels warm near the fire, a gentle check for frostbite, the lightest pressure on the chest to feel breath, the practice search for what could kill you if you missed it. The trembling puppy was hypothermic, but responsive. The one with the scraped leg winced, but did not cry. The coughing one wheezed, then quieted when Noah wrapped him in a wool blanket and let the warmth seep back. He laughed once, softly, when the smallest pup nosed his thumb with a strength that was almost comical. "All right," he murmured. The sound meant more for himself than for them. He needed names to speak to them, not because names changed things, but because they reminded him that things were already changed. He looked at the grit of snow on their fur, the way it melted into dark pinpricks. "Pebble," he said to the sturdier one, as if weight could be a promise. "Clover," to the one with the brave, awkward leg, because luck always arrived limping. "Soot," to the smallest, whose muzzle was dusted with gray. The dog watched, tail low but relaxed, as if assessing a ritual he recognized without ever having learned. Noah warmed milk on the stove, poured it into a shallow bowl, and set it near the fire. Hunger overcame fear. 3 tiny noses dipped, 3 tails flicked with the uncoordinated joy of survival. The sound they made was so earnest it pulled a sound from Noah he had not heard in his own house for a long time. A quiet chuckle. For a few minutes the world narrowed to breath, warmth, the ordinary miracle of bodies choosing life. Then the dog rose and moved to the window, not pacing, not barking. He stood with the exactness of a marker driven into the ground, his eyes fixed on the tree line as if on a thought. Noah felt the shift in the room, that internal click that said the day had more to say. He followed the dog's gaze. There was nothing there but snow and pine and the cold, a blankness that could mean peace or preparation. He told himself that vigilance was habit, that the dog was simply doing what dogs did in unfamiliar circumstances. Yet when he opened the door to knock snow from the mat, he saw the faintest disturbance near the road that cut along the cliff beyond the cabin, a set of compressed lines where snow had been pressed down and lifted again. Tire marks already softening under the morning light. Noah did not move closer. He memorized the angle, the spacing, the way the drift had been thrown to one side. Back inside, the dog's gaze never left the window. That was the moment the day pivoted, though Noah would not name it yet. He returned to the puppies, rewrapped the smallest, checked the scraped leg, and sat cross-legged on the floor until their shaking slowed. The dog settled beside him, a warm, living wall at his back. For a while there was only the fire and the small sounds of 3 lives mending themselves in increments too small to measure. And then, without warning, the dog stood again and gave a single, low huff, not a growl, but something older, a note that had more to do with certainty than with threat. He crossed the room and pressed his nose to the bottom seam of the door, inhaled once, twice. When he turned, his amber eyes met Noah's with a look that felt almost human in its insistence. Noah rose, a chill passing through him that had nothing to do with the weather. He opened the door, and the cold rushed in like a reprimand. The porch was empty. The woods were empty, yet the dog would not relax. Noah knelt and ran his fingers through the fur along the dog's neck, feeling the old scar where the harness had once burned. "What do you know?" he asked quietly, knowing the question was foolish and necessary at the same time. The dog's ears tipped forward again, and in that small movement Noah felt the rehook of the day, an unanswerable question braided into an ordinary morning. He shut the door, locked it, and went to the back wall where the security monitor hung. The cabin's cameras were not there for paranoia, but for weather and wildlife, for the practicalities of living alone, where help took time to arrive. He scrolled back through the night. At 2:17 a.m., a set of headlights slid across the snow near the bend by the cliff. A dark SUV, nondescript, slowed. The driver's door opened. 3 small shapes were set down with a motion that was careful enough to be cruel. The vehicle turned, its rear bumper catching the light for half a second, long enough to reveal a faint reflective triangle where a sticker had once been. Then the road swallowed it. Noah stared at the frozen moment until it felt like the image might stare back. The dog let out a breath that was almost a sigh. In that instant, the puppies were no longer simply abandoned. They were delivered. The knowledge did not make Noah angry so much as clear. He shut off the monitor and returned to the hearth. Pebble had fallen asleep with his head on Clover's shoulder. Soot's breathing was still shallow but steadier. Noah covered them again, careful not to disturb what the fire was already repairing. He felt something inside him that had nothing to do with old training and everything to do with faith. Faith not in outcomes, but in the small decisions that accumulate into meaning. He had chosen to live here to be left alone by the noise of the world. The world, it seemed, had found a quieter way to knock. By afternoon the light had sharpened, the lake a sheet of glass, the wind worrying at the eaves. Noah moved through his routines with a different attention, logging the time, noting the tire angle, making a list of what the puppies would need beyond warmth and milk. The dog did not leave the room. When Noah stood, the dog stood. When Noah paused at the window, the dog's eyes searched where his did. There was a kind of humor in it, a dry acknowledgment between 2 veterans of different wars. Sometimes the most important work begins after the gunfire stops. As dusk drew the shadows long across the snow, Noah sat on the floor with the 3 small bodies curled against his leg, the dog a steady weight at his back. He felt the cabin breathe around him, felt the day settle into the bones of the place. He did not yet know whose hands had set these lives down at his door or why. He knew only this: compassion had opened the first door, instinct had opened another, and somewhere between the two, something that felt like destiny was already walking toward him on 4 quiet paws. The daylight that followed the night of rescue did not soften the cold. It sharpened it. Noah Kerr woke to a sky the color of cut glass and a cabin that held warmth only where the fire had licked the stone. Pebble, Clover, and Soot slept in a loose knot near the hearth, their small bodies rising and falling in uneven rhythms that still asked for watching. The German shepherd, 5 years old, large, black and tan, with a heavy black saddle along his back, amber eyes set deep beneath vigilant brows, rose the instant Noah shifted. The dog's left forepaw touched down with the faintest hitch, the old fracture reminding them both of weather and memory. Noah moved quietly, keeping the routine he had built to keep his thoughts honest. Check the fire, test the latch, listen. Compassion had opened the first door yesterday. Today, instinct demanded that he look at what had walked through it. He crossed to the wall where the security monitor hung, a plain screen wired to 2 exterior cameras he'd installed for weather, wildlife, and the kind of solitude that made self-reliance non-negotiable. The dog sat at his heel, posture squared, eyes not on the screen but on the thin line of the door, as if the past were still knocking. Noah rewound the footage to the hours before dawn. Snow drifted across the image like static, the forest beyond the bend rendered in pale silhouettes. At 2:17 a.m., headlights slid into frame, careful and slow, the way someone drives when they do not want to be seen, but also do not want to skid. A dark SUV stopped near the bend where the road flirted with the cliff. The driver's door opened. A figure stepped out, shoulders hunched against the cold, and moved with a deliberateness that was worse than haste. 3 small bundles were set down on the snow as if they were packages, not breathing lives. The vehicle paused, idled just long enough to make sure nothing followed, then turned. As it did, the rear bumper caught the camera's weak light for a heartbeat, revealing the ghost of a reflective triangle where a sticker had once been. The road swallowed the taillights. Noah did not rewind again. He did not need to. He felt the moment in his body the way he once felt the click of a chamber, information becoming intent. The dog exhaled, a low sound that was neither growl nor sigh. Outside, the world remained perfect in its cruelty. Noah knelt and touched the dog's neck, where fur thinned over the scar from a harness long gone. "We're not guessing," he said quietly, to himself as much as to the animal. He looked again at the bend, noting the angle of the stop, the absence of hesitation. Whoever had done this had planned it. The puppies stirred. Clover tried to stand and wobbled, the scraped foreleg drawing a quick whine before pride shut it down. Soot coughed once, a sound so small it barely belonged to a body. Pebble blinked and pushed his muzzle into Noah's palm with a stubbornness that made him smile despite the cold. Warmed milk, watched them drink, checked the leg again. The dog stood a pace behind him, eyes following every motion, tail low but steady. When Noah opened the door to shake snow from the mat, the dog stepped forward and stopped him with his body, the same precise ceremonial block from the day before. Not warning, insistence. Noah obeyed it without argument. He changed boots, stepped out with care, and let the cold right itself on his lungs. The road below the cabin was already softening under light snowfall, but the dog's nose dropped to the boards, then to the edge of the steps, tracing something Noah could not see. The dog inhaled twice and gave a low, vibrating sound that raised the hair along Noah's arms. Gasoline, the dog's posture said without language. Rubber. And something else, metallic, sharp in a way the cold could not explain. Noah knelt, brushed a glove across the snow near the bottom step. The surface looked clean, too clean, as if a small disturbance had been intentionally minimized. He did not press farther into the drift. The dog's stance told him that what mattered was not what remained, but what had been taken. Back inside, Noah logged the time, the angle, the sticker's ghost. He fed the puppies again, wrapped soot tighter, and then made the decision that would carry the day forward. He would not treat this as a private mercy. He would let the world in the smallest, cleanest way possible. The town's veterinary clinic sat at the edge of a 2-street main drag, a low building that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old wood. The receptionist recognized Noah from winters past. He brought strays when the storms did their worst, and nodded him through without questions. The veterinarian, Dr. Ellen Moore, came out of the back with the quiet economy of someone who had learned how not to waste concern. She was in her early 40s, tall and lean, hair the color of wheat pulled into a low ponytail, pale skin flushed by cold, eyes a clear gray that missed very little. She had grown up on a farm and still carried that directness in her posture. "You don't bring 3 unless it's bad," she said, already reaching for gloves. Noah laid the puppies on the exam table, one by one. He described what he knew and what he didn't. Dr. Moore checked temperatures, heart rates, lungs. "Hypothermia mild," she said of Pebble. "Superficial abrasion for Clover's leg." For Soot, she listened longer, her mouth set. "Respiratory irritation. Could be cold, could be something else." She clipped a small scanner from her pocket and passed it along their necks. The device chirped once and then went silent. She tried again. "There was a chip here," she said, tapping gently beneath Soot's fur. "Or there was. It's been tampered with, not removed cleanly. Someone didn't want them traced." Noah felt the word settle. Someone. Dr. Moore's eyes flicked to him. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" He nodded. "You're also smelling that," she added, pausing, the faintest crease between her brows. "A sedative. Very light. I'll run a quick test, but this isn't just exposure." She moved away and returned with a strip, a small vial. When the color changed, it did so with the kind of certainty that leaves no room for hope. "Veterinary tranquilizer," she said. "Low dose, enough to keep them docile, not enough to kill. Whoever did this didn't want them loud or noticed." Noah pictured the figure at the bend, the careful placement. He thought of the dog at his heel, the metallic note in the air. Dr. Moore met his gaze. "If this is what it looks like, you need to tell someone." "I will," Noah said. He meant it in the way he meant all things, not as a promise to comfort himself, but as a plan. He paid, accepted a small bottle for Soot, and carried the puppies back to the truck. The dog jumped up beside them, settling in a way that made his bulk into a wall. On, chair, the drive back, the world kept its beauty. Snow feathered the pines. The lake shone. The dog's eyes tracked every passing vehicle, not with fear, but with a measured interest that felt like reading. At the cabin, Noah fed the puppies again, and then, as he was returning the empty bowl to the sink, the mailbox flag clacked outside. He frowned. Mail rarely climbed the hill in winter. The dog was already at the door, ears forward, body still. Noah opened it to find a single envelope, white, unmarked. No stamp, no return address, just paper, thin and certain. Inside, one line, printed, "Don't interfere." The dog pressed close to his leg, warmth and warning braided together. Noah felt the moment land where the morning had first begun to tilt. He did not crumple the note. He did not swear. He folded it once, slid it into his pocket, and stood for a long second with the door open to the cold. The forest said nothing. The world offered no explanation, only the invitation to choose. He closed the door and knelt by the puppies, letting their small weight anchor him to what mattered. Outside, light slipped toward afternoon. Inside, the fire held. And somewhere in the distance, a plan that had expected quiet had met a kind of attention it had not accounted for. Noah Kerr did not drive into town with the intention of finding a story. He drove with 3 small bodies asleep in a padded crate on the passenger seat and a single line of ink in his pocket that said, "Don't interfere." The words had not frightened him so much as clarified something he already knew. The night at the bend had not been a mistake, and the morning had not been a coincidence. The German shepherd rode in the back, large frame steady, amber eyes following the ribbon of road as if the world were a map unfolding beneath them. Snow dusted the shoulders, the lake a sheet of bone white under a sky that had no mercy for secrets. The chip that Dr. Moore could not read had left a trail anyway, old clinic notes, a shelter registry that still remembered a name. Evelyn Whitmore, 78, philanthropist, donor, lover of dogs. Owner, once, of 3 puppies whose lives had been reduced to bundles in the cold. The hospital rose from the edge of town like a long, pale ship, its Windows stacked in even rows, light spilling into the winter afternoon. Noah parked in the far lot, tucked the envelope deeper into his jacket, and rested a hand on the crate. Pebble blinked awake. Clover tried to stand and wobbled, stubborn as always. Soot coughed once, then settled when Noah's fingers brushed his back. The dog in the rear watched with a posture that was not aggressive, but exact, as if the building itself had become an object that required reading. Inside, the air was warm and faintly antiseptic, the kind of clean that carries its own weight. The nurse at the desk glanced at the crate, then at Noah. "You'll have to keep them in the carrier," she said, not unkindly. Noah nodded. He had not come to make a scene. He had come to learn what belonged to whom and why. The elevator hummed them to the third floor. The hallway was a corridor of white doors and soft footfalls, the sound of other lives being negotiated in small rooms. Outside room 312, he stopped. The Paimbai dog in the back shifted once, then went still. Noah exhaled and knocked. The door opened to a man in his mid-30s whose posture suggested he had learned to make himself smaller without ever truly yielding. He was tall and thin, dark hair combed back with a lawyer's neatness, cheekbones sharp under skin that had never known winter work. His suit was charcoal, his tie a precise gray, his mouth composed into something that might have been a smile if it had been meant for a person. "Can I help you?" the man asked. His voice was polished, every word a clause. "I'm looking for Evelyn Whitmore," Noah said. The man's eyes flicked once to the crate. "She's resting." "I won't take long." "Who are you?" "Noah Kerr." "And your business with my grandmother?" The word grandmother was delivered like a credential. Noah did not offer his own. "I believe these belong to her," he said, tilting the crate just enough for Pebble's face to appear, round eyes, blinking under a dusting of fur that had not yet recovered its shine. The man's mouth tightened by a degree that might have been invisible to anyone who had not learned to read faces as survival. "This isn't a good time," he said. "She needs quiet." A woman stepped into the doorway behind him, a study in controlled warmth. She was in her early 30s, honey blonde hair curled to her shoulders, skin luminous in a way that suggested effort, not accident. Her coat was cream faux fur over a burgundy knit dress. A small leather bag hung from her shoulder like punctuation. She smiled, a careful thing. "Grant," she said softly. "What is it?" "A man with dogs," he replied, without looking back. "I see," she said, eyes dropping to the crate with a practiced tenderness that felt almost real. "They're beautiful, but you understand. Evelyn is very fragile." Fragile was the word people used when they meant powerful and wanted it to sound kind. A third figure leaned against the far wall, hands in the pockets of a dark hoodie under a gray puffer jacket. He was built like a brawler, neck thick, hair cut close, eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. He had the look of someone who had learned that impatience could substitute for authority. When he pushed off the wall, the German shepherd's head lifted a fraction, ears angling forward. The man's gaze snagged on Noah, then on the crate. "What is this?" he said. His voice carried a rough edge, the kind that came from nights that did not end well. "Dane," the woman said gently, as if calming a child. "Please." Noah watched the three of them with the same attention he once gave rooms before entering them. Grant, the elder by posture if not by birth order, controlled with language. The woman, Marla he would learn, controlled with affect, the soft power of appearing to feel more than she did. And Dane controlled with the promise of speed, of doing what others only planned. When Noah shifted his weight, the dog in the back of the crate did something that had nothing to do with obedience and everything to do with instinct. He rose to his full height, shoulders squaring, eyes fixed not on Grant or Marla, but on Dane. There was no bark, There was only the low, resonant sound that carried through bone. "Your dog," Dane said, bristling. "Is it trained?" "He's honest," Noah replied. It was the first thing that came to him, and it felt true. Grant's jaw tightened. "I'm going to ask you to leave," he said. "Evelyn doesn't need surprises." "She owns 3 puppies," Noah said. "She did, anyway." Marla's smile flickered, then returned. "She loves dogs," she said, a phrase polished smooth by repetition. "That's precisely why this is not appropriate." The nurse at the desk down the hall glanced up, curious. Noah could have pushed. He could have made the scene the moment wanted. Instead, he did the other thing he had learned. He waited. "I'm not here to upset her," he said. "I'm here because someone left these in the cold last night." Dane snorted. "People dump animals all the time." The German shepherd's gaze did not leave Dane's face. His nose worked the air once, twice. Noah felt the dog's body shift as if the floor had changed pitch. He remembered the metallic note at the porch, the gasoline, the rubber. He remembered Dr. Moore's strip changing color in a way that did not ask for belief. "Who said they were dumped?" Marla asked too quickly. Grant shot her a look. The rehook came not as a sound, but as a moment of recognition that had the weight of revelation. The dog took one deliberate step forward inside the carrier, muscles bunching, and lowered his head in a posture that was not threat, but focus. His amber eyes locked on Dane. Noah felt the truth arrive in the same place the cold had touched him the day before. Inside the lungs, unavoidable. Whatever the dog was reading, in the air around this man matched what had been left on the snow outside the cabin. "You need to control that animal," Dane said, his hand drifting toward his pocket. Grant moved subtly between them, a lawyer's reflex dressed as protection. "Enough," he said. "This is a hospital." Noah lifted a hand, not to command the dog, but to acknowledge him. The German shepherd held his position, breathing slow, eyes never wavering. It was not aggression. It was recognition. "I'm not here to accuse anyone," Noah said. "I'm here to return what belongs to Evelyn." Grant's mouth pressed into a line that could have been regret if regret had ever lived there. "She can't receive visitors," he said. "She's had a cerebrovascular event. She's on medication. Stress is contraindicated." The words were correct. The intent behind them was not. "I'll speak to her physician," Noah said. "You won't," Dane said, stepping forward again. This time the dog did growl, low and unmistakable. The sound traveled through the hallway like a line drawn in chalk. Nurses appeared at doorways. Marla touched Dane's arm. "Please," she said, voice soft. "Not here." Grant looked from the dog to Noah, assessing. "What exactly do you think you have?" he asked. Noah thought of the envelope in his pocket, the chip that would not read, the sedative Dr. Moore had named without theatrics. He thought of 3 small bodies in the cold. "I think your grandmother's dogs were taken from her," he said, "and I think someone tried to make sure no one would connect them back to her." Grant laughed once, the sound thin. "That's a serious claim." "So is leaving puppies to freeze," Noah said. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a voice came from the room beyond the door, thin, wavering, but unmistakably human. "Grant?" it called. The name carried more than need. It carried authority, long practiced. Grant's shoulders shifted, as if the word had touched something beneath the suit. He turned, opened the door a fraction. "Yes, Evelyn," he said, suddenly gentle. "You need to rest." "Who is that?" the voice asked. "Why do I hear a dog?" Marla stepped forward, smile back in place. "A visitor, Evelyn. Someone with animals." There was a pause. "Bring them closer," the voice said. Grant's hand tightened on the door. He did not look at Noah when he spoke. "She's confused," he said quietly. "She's been in and out." "She knows what she loves," Noah said. He did not push past them. He did not raise his voice. He waited. The dog waited with him. For a long second, Grant weighed something that had nothing to do with policy. Then he stepped aside. Just enough. The room was bright, curtains pulled back to a winter that looked almost kind. Evelyn Whitmore lay propped against pillows, small in the bed, skin pale but eyes clear in a way that belied the word fragile. Her hair was silver, brushed neatly, a silk scarf looped at her neck as if even illness had not been permitted to dishevel her. She looked at Noah first, then at the crate, and something in her gaze softened that had nothing to do with age. "You found them," she said, not as a question. Noah set the crate down gently. Pebble lifted his head. Clover tried to stand. Soot coughed, then stilled. Evelyn's breath caught, a sound between grief and recognition. "My little ones?" she said. She reached out a hand that shook only slightly. Noah moved the crate closer, careful. The German shepherd sat at his heel, posture calm but coiled. Evelyn's fingers brushed fur. Her eyes filled, not with confusion but with something sharper, understanding. Grant watched from the foot of the bed, face composed. Marla stood with hands clasped, concern arranged just so. Dane leaned in the doorway, jaw tight, eyes darting from dog to Noah to the floor. "They were cold," Noah said quietly. "But they're alive." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When she opened them, they held a steadiness that had built fortunes and, perhaps, families. "You should not have them," she said, looking not at Noah but at the space where Grant stood. Grant's mouth opened, then closed. "Evelyn!" "You should not have touched them," she repeated, voice low, precise. The German shepherd exhaled, the sound of a boundary being affirmed. The hallway seemed to recede. For Noah, the world narrowed to the bed, the woman who had loved these animals enough to change the air in a room, and the three figures who had wrapped themselves in care while practicing something else. He did not yet have proof. He had only the dog's unwavering attention and a pattern of moments that refused to be accidental. But he felt the shape of what was coming as clearly as he had felt the cold that first morning. "I will speak with your doctor," he said to Evelyn. "With your permission." She nodded. "Once." "You will." Grant's eyes met Noah's, and for the first time the polish cracked, revealing something hard beneath. Marla's smile trembled. Dane's hands curled into fists. The chapter did not end with an arrest or a confession. It ended with recognition. In the bright, sterile light of a hospital room, loyalty and greed had taken their places, and a dog's instinct had pointed to the fault line between them. Noah did not leave the hospital with answers. He left with a shape of truth that refused to stay abstract. Snow had begun again, the small, clean kind that makes even a parking lot look forgiven. In the truck, the three puppies slept in a careful stack, their breaths tiny and uneven, while the German shepherd sat upright behind them, eyes still fixed on the path the building had made in the air. The sentence Evelyn had spoken, "You should not have touched them," echoed not as accusation, but as recognition. It was the sound of a woman who knew what love cost and who had learned, perhaps too late, how easily tenderness could be weaponized. Back at the cabin, Noah laid the puppies near the hearth and fed the fire until the stones began to glow. He moved as if assembling a map inside his body, camera footage from the bend, Dr. Moore's test strip, the envelope that had told him not to interfere, the way the dog had fixed on Dane as if scent were a language truer than speech. He opened his notebook and began the work that came after mercy, documentation. The legal architecture of the Whitmore estate did not reveal itself at once. It came in pieces, as law often does, through publicly filed notices, archived donor statements, and the polite opacity of foundations that prefer not to be examined by people without suits. Noah learned first what Evelyn intended. Over the last 2 years, she had redirected the bulk of her assets away from family trusts and into a new endowment for animal rescue and rural veterinary care, a fund designed to outlive her with the stubbornness of good soil. He learned next the hinge on which that generosity turned. If Evelyn were deemed to lack decision-making capacity, if physicians, under pressure or persuasion, recorded that she could no longer understand the nature and consequences of her choices, then control of the estate would shift to a conservator named in advance. Grant, the law was not a blade, it was a glove. It did not require blood to do harm. It required only a record that could be guided, a narrative that could be made to look like concern. Noah read the clause twice. He closed his eyes. He saw again the puppies in the snow, placed like objects, the light dose of sedative meant to quiet them without killing. He saw the envelope. The plan did not need violence. It needed heartbreak, confusion, and the appearance of benevolence. A grief-struck woman deprived of what she loved most, medicated for her own good, slowly documented into legal absence. It was an old story dressed in new language. The German shepherd rose and crossed the room, the hitch in his left forepaw, a metronome Noah had come to trust. He nudged the notebook with his nose and then went to the door, ears angling toward the winter. Noah followed. The dog did not want the forest. He wanted the truck. Noah understood. There were places where paper lived and places where scent did not lie. The town's gas station near the cliff was one of them. The owner, a compact man in his late 50s, with a beard the color of stove ash and a posture bent by decades of early mornings, recognized Noah with the easy familiarity of small places. His name was Paul Hendrick, and he had the manner of someone who watched the world without pretending to direct it. "You back already?" Paul said, eyes flicking to the truck. "Storm's thinking about staying?" "I need a favor," Noah said. Paul's gaze slid to the German shepherd, who sat, patient, alert. "You always do," he said, but there was no complaint in it. The cameras at the pumps were old but faithful, their black and white honesty a comfort. They showed the SUV at 2:12 a.m., the way it slowed, the rear bumper's ghost triangle, the way the driver avoided the pump closest to the building. Paul scrubbed a hand through his beard. "That one?" he said. "Didn't buy anything? License?" "Partial," Paul said. "Snow ate the rest." It was not enough to convict, but it was enough to narrow a universe. From the gas station, Noah went to the clinic. Dr. Moore did not pretend surprise when he asked for records. "You think they're trying to make her incompetent," she said, not as speculation, but as diagnosis. "I think they're already trying," Noah said. She printed lab results and medication logs with a precision that was itself a form of courage. "What they're using," she said, tapping the page, "is legal if the indication is correct. It becomes something else if it's being used to create an indication." The dog lay at her feet, a silent sentinel, the harness scar at his shoulder, a reminder of a life that had once been about following lines others could not see. Noah left with a folder and a promise that felt heavier than any oath. He would not be alone in this. The rehook arrived that night not as revelation, but as action. Snow had thickened, muffling the woods into a cathedral of white. Noah was in the Upheder kitchen warming broth for soot when the German shepherd stood so abruptly that a chair tipped. He did not bark. He did not growl. He went to the door and waited with a stillness that was more frightening than noise. Noah opened it to the storm and found, at the edge of the porch light, Dane's truck idling, its exhaust a low, impatient breath. Dane stood by the tailgate, hoodie pulled tight, eyes ringed with a sleeplessness that had nothing to do with worry. "You need to stop," Dane said. The wind tried to take the words. "This isn't your business." The dog stepped forward, placing his body between Noah and the night, amber eyes catching the porch light. Dane swallowed. For a heartbeat, the world balanced on the hinge of what men do when they believe they have already decided. "I know what you're doing," Noah said, not raising his voice. "And I know why." Dane's mouth twisted. "You don't know anything," he said, but the sentence lacked its own gravity. The German shepherd took one step closer and then stopped, nose lifting as if the air itself were evidence. Noah saw it then, not as scent, but as pattern. The faint metallic note on Dane's jacket, the same that had clung to the porch the night the puppies arrived. "Leave," Noah said. Dane did. Not because of the words, but because of the animal that did not move. When the truck disappeared, the dog returned to the hearth and lay down beside the puppies, who had slept through it all, as innocence does. The night had offered its warning. The morning offered work. Noah drove again, this time to the hospital, where a woman with short dark hair and eyes that measured rooms as if they were problems waited in a small conference office. Her name was Clara Reyes, a patient advocate with a spine that did not bend easily. She wore a navy blazer over a wool sweater, her posture upright, her voice calm. "I can't accuse without proof," she said, "but I can insist on procedure. Noah, place the folder on the table." "Then insist," he said. Together they walked through the chain of decisions that had brought Evelyn to the edge of legal erasure. Medication orders written in language that invited interpretation, nursing notes that repeated the word confused without context, the absence of a neurocognitive consult that should have been routine. Clara did not dramatize. She marked margins, underlined dates. "This," she said finally, "is a pattern." While Clara did what systems could do when they chose to remember their purpose, Noah did what dogs taught him. He followed the truth where it could be smelled. Dane's truck sat in the hospital garage, a smear of salt along its doors. The German shepherd circled it once, twice, nose tracing the seams with the quiet certainty of a compass. At the rear, near the bumper, the dog stopped and sat. Noah opened the tailgate. Beneath a tarp lay a small plastic case, the kind veterinarians used for field sedation. Empty, now, but carrying the faint, telling residue that Dr. Moore's test had named. Noah did not touch it. He photographed it. He closed the tailgate. Evidence did not require theater. It required care. The afternoon thawed the world just enough to make the road look like a promise. Back at the cabin, the puppies woke into a season that did not yet exist, tumbling into one another with the earnestness of new life. Noah knelt and began the simplest of rituals. He taught them to sit. Pebble understood first, small head tilting as if the word were a bird he could catch. Clover tried, fell, and stood again with a dignity that made Noah laugh aloud. Soot coughed, then placed his bottom on the rug as if the command had always belonged to him. The German shepherd watched from the edge of the circle, the way an elder watches children learn the grammar of trust. It was a light moment, a necessary one, and it did not dilute the work. It made it human. By evening, the storm thinned. Noah returned to the hospital not as a visitor, but as a witness. Clara met him with a document that had the force of paper and the humility of law. "A capacity evaluation," she said, "independent." Grant would not be able to stop it without exposing exactly what he wanted hidden. When Noah stood again at Evelyn's bedside, the room felt different, not brighter, but clearer. Evelyn looked at him with eyes that had not forgotten how to choose. "You brought them back," she said. "You brought my courage back, too." He placed the crate near her hand. The puppies wriggled. The German shepherd sat, his presence a benediction that asked nothing and promised everything. "I won't let them make you smaller," Noah said. Evelyn's mouth curved into something like a smile. The chapter ended not with sirens or signatures, but with alignment of law and mercy, of instinct and intention. Outside, the forest kept its winter. Inside, a woman's will, both the document and the spirit, began to reassert itself. The conspiracy had been designed to require no blood. It had not counted on a dog who could read what men would not say, nor on a man who would follow that reading into the machinery of the world. Noah did not mistake the quiet for peace. The night after Clara filed the request for an independent capacity evaluation, the forest settled into a hush that felt deliberate, as if the world were holding its breath to see which way a man would step. He drove back toward the cabin with the headlights low, the road a ribbon of silver beneath new snow. The 3 puppies slept in their padded crate, small bodies warm with the simple trust of those who do not yet know the cost of being found. In the rear, the German shepherd sat upright, black and tan coat catching the dashboard light, amber eyes steady. His left forepaw, the one that had never quite healed, rested lightly on the mat, ready, not strained. Noah had learned to read that posture the way some men read maps. When the truck crested the last bend before the property, the dog's ears tilted forward a fraction, then another. Noah slowed. The driveway lay open, the cabin a dark geometry against the snow, and something in the shape of the night felt wrong. He cut the engine and listened. Wind, a branch ticking against the eaves, the far hush of the lake. He stepped out and felt the cold take his breath. The porch light came on at the switch. The beam fell across boards, scuffed by boots that were not his. The door to the woodshed hung crooked, its latch bent. Inside, the neat stack he had split that morning lay in a tangle, a quiet violence in the disorder. He did not chase the damage. He did what he had promised himself he would do. He documented it. He photographed the boot marks in the drift, the bent latch, the scattered logs. He did not let the story become private. The German shepherd moved through the scene without sound, nose low, reading the night. He paused at the shed's threshold, inhaled, then lifted his head and fixed his gaze on the tree line. Noah did not need the word followed. The dog's body had already spoken it. In the morning, Noah drove the evidence to the county seat and placed it in the hands of the one person he believed would hold it without bending. Investigator Mark Hale met him in a small office that smelled of paper and coffee. Hale was in his early 50s, tall and spare, hair iron gray at the temples, face cut by lines that had been earned rather than chosen. He wore a flannel under his jacket, a detail that marked him as a man who understood winter the way farmers do. "You're telling me they were on your property last night?" Hale said, studying the photos. "I'm telling you they want me to feel watched," Noah replied. Hale looked at the German shepherd, who lay at Noah's heel like a coiled sentence. "You're also telling me you don't want to handle this yourself." Noah met his eyes. "I'm telling you, I won't." Hale nodded once. He was not a man who romanticized restraint, but he respected it. "Then we do this clean," he said. "You give me everything. I give you a file number." The words felt like ballast. Noah handed over the camera stills, Dr. Moore's lab notes, Paul Hendrick's partial plate, the photograph of the plastic veterinary case from Dane's truck. Hale's jaw set as the pattern revealed itself. "This isn't a bar fight," he said. "This is paper and power, but paper and power leave prints." Outside, the day rose into a brittle blue. Back at the cabin, Noah did what men do when waiting becomes dangerous. He worked, he split wood, he fed the puppies. He practiced the simplest commands, not because he expected obedience from creatures so new to the world, but because ritual steadied both hands and heart. Pebble learned to sit as if the word were a promise. Clover toppled and tried again, a comic hymn to persistence. Soot coughed once, then pressed into Noah's leg as if to say, "I am here." The German shepherd watched from the edge of the circle, expression unreadable but intent, as though he were measuring not the puppies, but the space around them. Snow fell impatient in sheets. By dusk, the sky had the look of a held breath. The rehook arrived when the world went quiet in a way that was not natural. The German shepherd stood from the hearth without a sound and walked to the door, tail low, ears forward. He did not bark. He did not growl. He waited, a statue carved from attention. Noah reached for his coat and followed him into the cold. The dog led, not toward the road this time, but along the edge of the clearing, into the trees where the wind stitched patterns in the drifts. 20 yards in, he stopped at a low mound that did not belong to the land. He pawed once, then stepped back and sat. Noah knelt and brushed snow away with gloved hands. Beneath the crust lay a black trash bag, its plastic stiff with cold. He cut it open carefully. Inside, a small inventory of intent. 2 empty vials labeled with the faint purple of veterinary sedatives, a frayed collar stamped with the name of a local rescue in faded letters, and a strip of gray fabric, snagged with the pale hairs of a young dog. Noah felt the weight of it, not as anger, but as confirmation. The dog lowered his head to the open bag, inhaled, then lifted his gaze toward the deeper forest, as if to say, "This is not the beginning." Noah did not pocket the items. He photographed them in place, marked the coordinates on his phone, and covered the bag again. He went back to the cabin and called Hale. "I have a location," he said, "and a reason." Hale's voice on the line was calm, the sound of a man who had been waiting for the other shoe to fall. "Don't touch it," he said. "We'll be there." They arrived an hour later. Hale, a younger deputy with a camera and a forensic tech, bundled against the cold. Flashlights cut pale tunnels through the trees. The German shepherd kept to Noah's side, not interfering, not seeking attention, only watching. The tech worked with the reverence of someone who knew that small things can change large rooms. Vials bagged, collar photographed, fibers taped. Hale stood and breathed out once, long. "This is enough to open more than a file," he said. "Conspiracy to manipulate assets, improper administration of medication, animal cruelty. And," he added, glancing at the direction the dog had indicated, "it suggests a disposal pattern." The night did not offer comfort, but it did offer clarity. The days that followed did not bring silence. They brought pressure. A truck idled on the county road and drove on. A voice left a message on Noah's phone that said nothing but carried a threat in its emptiness. The cabin's mailbox was opened and closed without mail. Noah did not answer the pressure with bravado. He answered it by tightening the line between himself and the law. He met with Hale again. He met with Clara. He gave them everything. The German shepherd slept by the door, the hitch in his paw more pronounced when the weather changed, but his posture never did. One afternoon, as the light tilted toward evening, the dog rose and moved to the window. His nose traced the glass. Noah followed his gaze to the tree line. Nothing moved, and yet the dog did not settle. He turned, walked to the truck, and waited. Noah understood without words. There were places where the forest kept what men did not want found. They drove to the edge of the old logging road that cut a scar into the hills. Snow lay deep there, the kind that erases footsteps, but not purpose. The dog led at a steady trot, the way he had once led men through darker places. Twice he stopped, circled, corrected. At a narrow ravine where the trees grew tight and the wind dropped, he halted. He lowered his head, then looked back at Noah, eyes bright with that calm certainty that had never once asked for belief. Beneath a crust of snow and needles, they found another bag, smaller than the first. Inside, a set of gloves that still held the warmth of a hand not long gone, and a folded sheet of paper spotted with moisture. that had not come from the sky. Noah did not open it. He called Hale. The chase was not a sprint. It was a procession of facts assembling themselves into a form that could stand in court. Hale's team moved with the patience of people who knew that timing is part of truth. They confirmed the sedative's batch numbers with suppliers. They matched fibers to the rescue collar. They traced the gloves to a purchase made with a card that did not belong to Evelyn Whitmore. The pressure increased. Grant sent a letter through counsel that spoke in the language of restraint while attempting to reframe reality as misunderstanding. Marla appeared at the grocery store with concern arranged on her face like flowers. Dane drove past the cabin at night and did not stop. The German shepherd did not sleep through any of it. He paced when the wind carried the wrong note. He sat when the world felt clear. He became, without ever being trained for it, a living instrument of caution. Noah did not take the bait of confrontation. He took notes. He waited. The chapter ended not with a siren but with a call. Hale's voice carried something like winter sunlight in it. "We have enough to proceed," he said. "Warrants will follow. And Noah, whatever they're trying to make you feel, it isn't isolation. It's fear." Noah looked at the 3 puppies tangled on the rug, at the dog who had turned scent into direction, at the forest that had given up what it had been asked to hold. "Then they've misread the compass," he said. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing the shallow marks of men. Inside, a trail had been drawn that did not require a chase with fists or guns, only the steady, stubborn alignment of instinct and law. The hospital did not change its rules for hope. It changed them for evidence, for compassion, and for the thin places where policy admits the human body is more than a chart. After Investigator Hale filed the warrants and Clara Reyes secured an emergency review of Evelyn Whitmore's care, the Ethics Board approved a single, supervised pet therapy visit, an exception carved from precedent and stitched to procedure. No improvisation, no theatrics. One visit, in daylight, with staff present. Noah read the conditions twice, then folded the paper into his pocket the way he folded everything that mattered. The 3 puppies were bathed, dried, and wrapped in soft fleece that still carried the cabin's wood smoke. Pebble blinked into the new world with the solemnity of a monk. Clover attempted to leap from Noah's arms and landed in a tangle of paws and pride. Soot coughed once, then pressed into Noah's chest as if his heart were a hearth. The German shepherd waited at the door, black and tan coat gleaming where winter light found it, amber eyes steady. He had been through corridors like this before in another life, rooms where breath was measured and the smallest motion mattered. His left forepaw, forever a fraction slower than the rest of him, touched down with care. He was not a prop. He was a presence. The nurse who met them at the ward was small and sharp-eyed, her badge reading Lydia Park. She moved with the brisk mercy of someone who had learned to do 10 things at once without losing any of them. "We keep it calm," she said, voice low. "We keep it clean. We stop if there's any sign of distress." Noah nodded. The investigator waited down the hall, out of sight. Clara stood with a clipboard, her posture composed, the line of her jaw set with a resolve that did not require volume. When the doors to recovery opened, the room held the particular quiet of machines doing their faithful work. Evelyn Whitmore lay propped against pillows, hair brushed into a silver halo, skin pale but eyes alert in a way that had not dimmed since the day she recognized her puppies. The light fell cleanly across the bed, as if the winter itself had been filtered into something kind. Grant stood at the far side of the room in a tailored gray suit, hands folded as though he were at a service rather than a bedside. Marla sat near the window, coat arranged, concern resting on her face like a practiced expression. Dane was absent. His shadow had been replaced by paperwork and warrants that moved in quiet rooms without announcing themselves. "Mrs. Whitmore," Lydia said gently, "your visitor is here." Evelyn turned her head, eyes focusing with effort that was not painful, but purposeful. "Bring them," she said. Noah stepped forward. The German shepherd moved with him, stopping at the threshold like a sentinel who understood the gravity of permission. Lydia nodded once. The dog lay down, not at the foot of the bed, but slightly to the side where Evelyn could see him and where he could see everything else. Noah knelt and set the crate within reach. Pebble rose first, solemn as ever. Clover tumbled into Noah's sleeve and tried again. Soot leaned forward, nose working the air. Evelyn's breath caught. "My sons," she whispered, using the name she had always called them when no one else was listening. She extended a hand that trembled not with fear, but with the exertion of being present. Pebble pressed his forehead into her palm. Clover followed, a small avalanche of warmth. Soot, last and bravest, climbed the edge of the crate and placed one paw on her wrist, a contact as light as a vow. The German shepherd lifted his head. His eyes did not soften, they clarified. The machines hummed. The room held its breath. What happened next was not a mystery and not a spectacle. It was memory finding its body. Evelyn's breathing deepened, not in a sudden miracle, but in a steady reclaiming. Her gaze sharpened. The small tremor in her hand stilled. "You're cold," she said to Soot, voice thin but unmistakably hers. "Always were." Noah felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight since the night he found them on the porch. Clara's pen hovered over her clipboard and did not move. Lydia watched the monitors and nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Grant took a step forward, the crease between his brows deepening. "Grandmother," he said, "you need to rest." Evelyn did not look at him. She did not need to. She knew his voice the way a gardener knows the difference between rain and irrigation. "I am resting," she said, "with what I love." The re-hook came not from words, but from the dog. The German shepherd rose, crossed the small space, and placed his broad head against the side of the bed, near Evelyn's knee. It was not affection in the way people mean it. It was recognition. He inhaled once, deeply, and then exhaled in a long, measured breath that seemed to empty the room of everything unnecessary. Evelyn's eyes lifted to him, and something like wonder passed across her face. "You found me a guardian," she said to Noah, "or I found him." Grant cleared his throat. "Evelyn, this is all very moving, but we mustn't allow emotion to compromise your care." Evelyn finally turned her head. The look she gave him was not anger. It was winter. "Do not mistake feeling for confusion," she said. "I have been medicated into quiet. That is not care." Marla leaned forward, voice soft. "We only want what's best for you." Evelyn's mouth curved into something like sadness. "What you want for me has required me to be smaller," she said. "What they want for me," she touched the puppies with her free hand, "has made me larger." She looked at Noah. "Show me." Noah did not rush. He did not perform. He set the folder on the rolling table with the reverence one gives a fragile thing that contains something indestructible. "This is what we found," he said. "Dr. Moore's tests, the camera near the cliff, the vials, the collar from the rescue you donated to, the fibers from my porch, the gloves from the ravine. Investigator Hale has custody of the originals." Evelyn listened. Her face did not contort. It settled. "And the clause?" she asked. Noah met her eyes. "If you're declared to lack capacity, control of the estate passes to Grant." Grant's breath sharpened. "That is a gross simplification." "It is also accurate," Clara said quietly from the doorway. "We have initiated an independent capacity evaluation. Pending that, access to financial instruments is frozen." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, not in fatigue, but in calculation. When she opened them, the warmth that had filled the room turned, like a river finding a colder bed. "I raised you with love," she said to Grant and Marla. "I do not recognize what you have raised in yourselves." Grant took a half-em, stepped back as if struck. Marla's composure wavered, then returned. "You're under stress," she said. "We can talk later." "We will talk now," Evelyn said, "while I am here." She reached toward the bedside table. Lydia anticipated the movement and slid a document into Evelyn's hand. It was already prepared: an emergency revocation of guardianship authority, an appointment of Investigator Hale as temporary fiduciary pending court review, and a directive to freeze discretionary accounts. "Read it to me," Evelyn said. Lydia did, slowly, without ornament. Evelyn listened, eyes never leaving the puppies, as if anchoring herself to the reason she had survived long enough to sign. When Lydia finished, Evelyn picked up the pen. Her hand shook once, then steadied. She signed. The sound of the pen against paper was small. It was also final. Grant's face drained of color. "You can't." "I can," Evelyn said. "And I have." She looked at Noah again. "You did not bring me a miracle," she said. "You brought me myself." Noah shook his head. "They did," he said, nodding to the 3 small bodies curled against her hand. "And he did," she said, looking at the German shepherd, who had resumed his place at the side of the bed, posture calm, eyes clear. The machines hummed on, unoffended by human drama. Lydia touched Evelyn's shoulder. "We'll keep the visit short," she said gently. "You've done enough for today." Evelyn nodded. She bent with care and kissed the tops of the puppies' heads one by one. "You are home," she whispered, "even when you are not with me." Marla stood, eyes bright with a moisture that might have been real if it had not arrived too late. Grant did not speak again. He did not need to. The law had begun to speak for him. Noah gathered the puppies, each reluctant in its own way. Clover tried to crawl back onto the bed. Soot coughed and then quieted. Pebble watched Evelyn as if memorizing a son. The German shepherd followed Noah out, pausing once to look back at the woman who had chosen courage in a room designed for compliance. In the hallway, Clara let out a breath she had been holding since the door closed. Lydia wrote a note on the chart that would look ordinary to anyone who did not know what had just happened. Investigator Hale appeared at the end of the corridor, his face set in the quiet of a man whose work had just become simpler and heavier at the same time. "It's done," he said. Noah nodded. "Then so are they," he said. Outside, the winter had not softened. The lake was still a blade of light. The forest still kept its own counsel. But in the small space between breath and courage, something had shifted. The miracle had not fallen from the ceiling. It had risen from 3 small bodies and the will of a woman who refused to be erased. Winter did not loosen its grip on North Minnesota simply because the truth had been spoken. Snow still hardened the roads. Wind still pared the hills to bone. But after the signatures, the warrants, the quiet exodus of power from the hands that had misused it, something in the town changed its posture. Doors opened, voices lowered. People began to look at one another again, not as obstacles to inheritance or rumor, but as neighbors whose lives touched at the margins. The investigation widened: conspiracy to manipulate legal capacity, misuse of medication, intimidation of witnesses, and it did so without spectacle. Justice in small towns does not arrive with sirens. It arrives with envelopes, hearings, and a collective exhale. Evelyn Whitmore recovered the way winter forests recover, not all at once, but unmistakably. Her strength returned in increments, measured by steps and sentences. When she could sit by the window again, light made a pale halo around her silver hair. Her face, once thinned by sedation and grief, began to hold the lines of a woman who had loved hard and chosen harder. She asked for paper, then for meetings. She asked for the names of clinics in counties that maps often forget. And when she spoke of what she wanted to do, it was never framed as charity. It was framed as repair. "We do not replace what was broken," she said to Clara Reyes one afternoon. "We reinforce what was always carrying too much." The foundation came into being quietly. North Pine. Conde Canine Haven, not merely a shelter, but a network that paired veterinary care with outreach for elders who lived too far from clinics, whose animals were often their last line of companionship. Grants were structured, mobile units planned, partnerships drafted with rural nurses and volunteer drivers. There was no plaque with Evelyn's name in large letters. If it appeared anywhere, it was in the fine print, as if she wanted the work to outgrow her before it ever carried her. Noah was offered money first. He refused it the way some men refuse praise, by placing it back on the table and stepping away. He did not do this because he believed he was above compensation. He did it because his life had taught him that money was a language he did not speak as fluently as duty. He accepted instead a role that fit his hands. Field guardian for the Foundation's operations, the one who would reach the cabins at the end of roads that maps sometimes fail to draw, who would evaluate reports, coordinate rescues, and, when necessary, stand between the vulnerable and the cold logic of those who saw them as disposable. He returned to his cabin with the 3 puppies in a crate that no longer felt temporary. The porch was the same, wide boards scoured by weather, the view of the lake a blade of winter light. Yet when he stepped into the familiar quiet, it was not solitude that greeted him. Pebble stepped out first, solemn as ever, surveying the world as if the world were a contract he intended to honor. Clover burst forward, tripped on the threshold, and discovered joy in the failure of gravity. Soot paused, coughed once, then followed, tail held like a small flag of determination. The German shepherd took his place at Noah's side, black and tan coat a map of endurance, amber eyes a steady measure of what lay ahead. His left forepaw still touched down with that fractional delay, the old injury reminding them both that survival was not about perfection, but persistence. The town noticed. Children stopped at the edge of the driveway to ask about the puppies. The postman left notes instead of envelopes when he wanted to talk. At the diner, people who had once turned away now nodded. There were apologies that came with coffee refills and silences that meant more than words. In a place where reputation had once been a currency easily spent, a different economy was taking shape, one that paid in acts, not appearances. Noah did not seek community. It found him anyway. There were calls from a widow whose arthritic hands could no longer lift her shepherd into the truck for winter checkups. There was a rancher whose cattle dog had stepped into a snare meant for something else. There was a retired teacher who had lost his wife and did not know how to lose the dog too. Each time, Noah listened first. Each time the German shepherd did what he had always done, tested the air, read the unseen, placed himself where he could protect without threatening. The dog was not a talisman. He was a practice. He taught Noah that vigilance could be gentle, that presence could be enough. About a third of the way into this new life, the rehook arrived not as a crisis, but as a question. It came on a morning when the light lay clean on the lake, and the wind had dropped to something like a whisper. Noah was loading the truck with supplies for the first mobile clinic run when the German shepherd stopped, head lifted, ears angled, not toward the road, but toward the woods beyond the ridge. It was not alarm. It was recognition. Noah followed the line of his gaze and felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the sense that something important was arriving in a language he had learned to trust. He did not know what it meant. He only knew it mattered. They drove anyway. Duty did not pause for premonitions. The mobile unit was parked by a church that doubled as a community hall in winter, its windows fogged with warmth and breath. Inside, Lydia Park, the nurse who had once supervised a miracle with the steadiness of a professional, was organizing charts with the efficient kindness that had become her signature. She looked up when Noah entered. "We've got a full slate," she said, "and a surprise." The surprise was a woman in a wool coat the color of late autumn, her hair pinned back in a style that suggested habit rather than fashion. Her name was Margaret Hale, no relation to the investigator, though the coincidence made her smile. She was in her early 70s, tall but spare, with skin weathered by years of wind and a gaze that did not waste time. She had driven 2 hours to ask whether the foundation could help her neighbor, an older man who refused aid because he did not want to be a burden, even as his dog's limp worsened with every mile of frozen ground. "He won't ask," Margaret said simply. "So I will." There was no drama in her voice, only the unembarrassed courage of someone who had learned that care is not a favor. It is a practice. The German shepherd moved toward Margaret without invitation, sat, and waited. He did not touch her. He did not stare. He held a space. Margaret's eyes softened. "You're the compass they told me about," she said, half to Noah, half to the dog. Noah felt the quiet click of things aligning. The dog's earlier pause on the ridge made sense now, not as prophecy, but as readiness. By the time the clinic closed, they had a route for the next week, and a list of people who would never appear on any registry because they had never believed they deserved to be counted. Noah loaded the last crate, the German shepherd's breath clouding the cold. Clover had fallen asleep in a coil of fleece. Pebble watched the door as if guarding a promise. Soot nosed the edge of the crate, curious even in exhaustion. Back at the cabin, evening came without ceremony. The porch light glowed, a small, stubborn sun against the early dark. Noah stood for a moment before stepping inside, the German shepherd beside him, the puppies at his feet. He did not think of what had been lost to bring him here. He thought of what had been given, a way to belong that did not require him to be less than he was, only more of what mattered. He knelt and let the puppies climb him. Clover licked his chin. Soot sneezed into his collar. Pebble pressed his forehead into Noah's palm with a gravity that belied his size. The German shepherd lay down, body a line of warmth, between the door and the world, as if saying without words that thresholds are not just places where danger enters, they are places where light is chosen. The porch was still cold. Winter still kept its rules. But the house was no longer a single life held against the dark. It was a small constellation, one man, one dog, who read the invisible, 3 fragile lives that had taught him how destiny sometimes arrives. Not with thunder, not with proof, but with 4 trembling legs and a trust that asks to be answered. There are days when a person saves 3 dogs. And there are other days, quiet, ordinary days, when 3 dogs save a person back. Sometimes a miracle does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, on 4 trembling legs in the snow. Or in the moment, a weary heart chooses kindness when it would be easier to close the door. In those ordinary choices, God often places extraordinary purpose. The porch may still be cold, the world may still be heavy, but grace has a way of finding the faithful, through love that acts, through courage that stays, through small lives that remind us we were never meant to walk alone. If you're watching this with your own worries sitting beside you like an invisible winter, remember this: a single good deed can be the first light in a long night. Check on a neighbor. Be gentle with someone who's struggling. Protect what is vulnerable even when no one is applauding. Because in everyday life, God's miracles often wear simple clothing: patience, compassion, and the strength to do the right thing. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what moment in the story stayed with you. And if you want more stories of loyalty, justice, and second chances, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. May God bless you, keep you safe, and fill your home with peace. And may He send you at the perfect time the kind of light that helps you find your way back to warmth.